I put a spell on you. Oh, because you're mine. Then stop running around. Ow! Because you're mine. Anyhow. Good morning, everyone. I rarely answer all tomorrow's related questions, but this one I had been receiving so many times that I just thought I had to do an exception. Is something like all tomorrows possible? Okay, so just a little context first. All Tomorrows was this kind of weird science fiction story I wrote in 2005 when I was a teenager. And I just put it online. It's a future history, a future evolution of humanity. And it's nicely illustrated. But the gist of the matter is in 2021, it exploded in popularity. And it keeps on exploding. And, well, I'm very happy for this. And I'm very thankful. And long story short, you can read it in the link below. But speaking about links below, if you're curious about All Tomorrows, and if you maybe want to see more of the sneak previews from the rewrite of All Tomorrows that I am doing, by the way, yes, I am completely rewriting and re-illustrating All Tomorrows, so let that be known for posterity. Please support me on patreon.com. The link is below, and every penny really makes a difference for me. And for your contribution, you get to see excerpts from the new All Tomorrows book and from my other projects. You get to see a lot of stuff you can't see anywhere else. So these All Tomorrow's lore videos have become really popular, especially thanks to my friend Beware the Q on YouTube. Hello to you again, man. And this one question, just last week 3 different people asked me, and in the previous year I must have received it like 20 different times. So I'll just let my ideas be known about this whole matter. Is something like All Tomorrows possible? This video contains some details from the All Tomorrows book, so I'm not going to explain everything in context. So if you're curious, go read it. And, well, thank you for your support of this channel and your interest in All Tomorrows and more. The long answer shortened is no. Many people said your book is very realistic and it feels so lifelike and weird. And to this, I'm only thankful. I think it feels that way because the book has no plot, it's just lore. And when it's just lore, crafting narratives like that has a special taste, all of its own. I think it's one of the unacknowledged facts of contemporary popular culture, that instead of reading about the adventures of, say, Luke Skywalker, people have a far more entertaining time just reading or listening to stuff about all those weird background aliens and stuff in Star Wars. So the same way with All Tomorrows is that there's no story, there are no heroes, it's just history unfolding. But still, I think it's highly unlikely. The whole story of All Tomorrows is kind of predicated on the colonization of the solar system and galaxy by humans. And I think that's just flat out impossible. I think I've spoken about this before, but you might be surprised that your favorite sci-fi author, the guy who writes about galactic conflict and disasters, is actually a hard techno-skeptic when it comes to colonizing space or going to Mars or building like these Muskian fantasies on other planets. Fuck that, it's never gonna happen. I would want it to happen, but even basic, like quote-unquote basic things like, oh, we're just going to terraform Mars, it's never going to happen. There have been studies performed about this. And even if you somehow have the technology to find asteroids, bring them in, crash them to Mars, wait for centuries, even if you could do that, it's never going to happen because the atmosphere of Mars is just too weak. If you pump it full of oxygen, it's still going to seep back away to space in a couple of centuries. So you have to import air, import maybe all your energy needs. I mean, you could have nuclear power plants and somehow crack the ice and make oxygen and shit. But what happens if the control rods break down? You have to ship a new one in. And it's a long, long way off from Earth. I'm not ruling out research bases on Moon and maybe Mars, but big cities for humans to live in for generations, they're impossible. And even if terraforming was possible, it's going to be a project that will take 100 years. Now, if you look at the current condition of the world, there are no endeavors that long. I mean, you just don't have the... Remember, technology is just not just ray guns and spaceships. Technology is also social organization. And currently, you just don't have the budgets or the organization needed to carry out a project as big as that. So imagine you like launch your asteroid catcher ships and they find an asteroid in 80 years, but maybe your company is not there anymore, your government's not there anymore, because the world has more pressing concerns like water and food security and maybe limited nuclear war. See where I'm getting at? People currently don't have the means of social organization. Even with communism, even with a hard kind of like Soviet-style communism, I mean, the Soviets did destroy entire ecosystems. And that only took, 80 years? And the same is not going to happen with like free market Muskian capitalism either. The companies need some sort of revenue. Who's going to pay for that all that time? And even if that was somehow possible, you would still be trapped in the solar system. I think going to another planet is an entire ball game, and it's an entire different level of implausibility. You could maybe launch generation ships, but what are they gonna do? I mean, it will be easier to have just space bases in vacuum. But there are a lot of unknowns in all of these scenarios when this proverbial rubber hits the road. You know, people say, we'll build generation ships. Okay. How are people going to breed there? How are they going to have kids? Who's going to grow the plants? Who's going to scrub the toilets? What if something breaks down? Are you going to be able to make the replacement parts? You know, it collapses when you start looking at it in detail. I mean, in the best possible case, you'll have some of this evil, very evil Snowpiercer society drifting out in a canister in space, and they all die in 120 years. Like putting a bunch of roaches in a tin can and throwing them in the ocean. It's just too hostile to survive. You can't even reproduce terrestrial habitats yet. I mean, there was this famous experiment with the quote-unquote biosphere 2, and I spoke about this at length in some of my other videos. Check the links below about why I'm such a grumpy old man about this shit. But basically, these people were on Earth, okay? They had this entire closed biosphere, the size of several football fields or something. And even then, they still couldn't make it work. They had to cheat and import water and oxygen. And the people who participated in this experiment hated each other so much that they never spoke with each other again. So you can already predict that even if like the best and noblest crew goes out and kind of like acts in the fairest, most scientistist way possible, they're still going to hate each other's guts. Some primal human hierarchy shit is going to kick in at some stage or the other. And it's going to be an extremely stratified and evil society if they manage to survive in these generation ships at all. Which they won't be able to, I'm sorry. And yes, I always get these like caveat responses like, oh yes, but people used to think flying was impossible. It's not the same, motherfucker. It's not the same. Unless they discover some new way to like do wormholes. But that whole thing requires so much energy, even in theory. It needs more energy than the sun produces in a year or something. And well, people just don't know how to handle those energies. There's also the slight problem with materials. Like I see all these like young kids harping on about space elevators and ring worlds and shit. Well, the tensile strength of the material you need to build that is like stronger than diamonds. And how are you going to manufacture that shit in so much quantity? Where are you going to build the forges? It's just not going to pan out. Now, I predict there will be lots of shit going on in space. I mean, we depend today, many of us depend on GPS, which is itself dependent on these networks of satellites. So, like, don't get me wrong, people will do a lot of stuff in space, but I think it will be limited to the Earth orbit and maybe the moon. And yes, we will send all sorts of weird Tingama Zingama Bob robots to Mars and some of the other more exotic planets. And almost certainly we will send like stuff to deep space like Voyager. That is easy, but no human beings. Now maybe some weirder alternatives are possible, but none of these are similar to the scenarios I had in All Tomorrows. You could send out these like really heavily AI driven probes and maybe hope they will encounter something resembling people in the far future. And maybe if they find them, they can perform this like puppy routine to these hypothetical aliens to explain what Earth is. Maybe you could have this something like the responses of, I don't know, Bill Gates and Joe Biden and Donald Trump, like all the world's biggest and brightest in a simulated can, and they could have conversations with these aliens if they find them. But, you know, don't get your hopes up. So there, I don't know. So that's one strike down for global colonization already. What I think is going to happen is, like, if you consider the future of humanity, if you consider the history of humanity, there are these like very, very beautiful archaic stone carvings in what is now the Sahara Desert, and they date from 9000 BC or some stuff like that. Clearly there was this like sophisticated civilization, maybe not farmers, but certainly like some smart and intelligent and interesting people living there. And where are they now? Dust and ash, one with Tyre and Nineveh, all gone. Moving forwards in time, you had the bright flourishing of the Roman Empire, and before them the ancient Greeks and Sumerians, but these civilizations also collapsed. Rome was like, I mean, they did achieve some materially high results, and yes, they did have some like nice cities for a while, but at a cost. And it kind of collapsed not just because of quote-unquote barbarian invasions, but I think a lot of people were just sick of that burden of maintaining all that civilization and all those taxes and that whole inhumane apparatus of force. So they kind of like clocked out, and at one point it was like just far more efficient to flush the whole thing down the drain. And yes, you weren't able to build aqueducts and siege engines and colosseums anymore, but I think it had to do as much, if not more, with people getting sick of that shit as it did with barbarian invasions. And you know, you feel similar stuff today, don't you? You have these amazing skyscrapers, wonderful ring roads, amazing jet planes and airports and shit, amazing cargo terminals. But most people, myself included, kind of hate this world civilization. It's a kind of instinctive hatred because we also enjoy its like products and benefits, but we sense there is something wrong with these processes, that it dehumanizes us and makes almost more people unhappy. If you know what I'm saying. So maybe in the same way, people will clock out of this current global civilization, and kind of maybe we will see another collapse. And I'm predicting this will happen like 9 or 10 more times in the future. Remember, we still have a long time to go on Earth. And then something will happen and humans will go extinct and life will endure. And that will be that. All Tomorrows, the realist version for you from Daddy Kozman. If you listened so far, please comment I believe in All Tomorrows so that we do something about this algorithm. And, you know, we get some nice comments, interactions. It really helps my channel, so thank you in advance. So that's there. This is not to be nihilistic, by the way. Like, life is still what you make of it. And, well, if you've been following this channel, you know that in my heart of hearts, I have this mystical understanding of life. as basically time is permanent. So the nice things you experience and do will always be in the registry of the universe somehow. Maybe, who knows, after you pass on, you get to enjoy these moments. Now, the flip side is all the cringe stuff will also be there forever too, but, well, you gotta take the better with the bitter, huh? So these are my, realistic ideas for a real all tomorrows. We will never colonize other planets. I mean, I hear all this oh, it's about time humanity stopped being a single planet species. It's just marketing. Wake the fuck up. It's just marketing, mostly for Elon Musk's Starship company. And that's doing so well because, believe it or not, until 2020, the USA depended so heavily on Russia for satellite stuff. They depended so heavily on Russia and Europe. And if you look at global geopolitics now, it's clear to see that the USA is aiming for basically bringing home all of its heavy industrial capabilities. They're going to have chip factories in Arizona, I believe. They're going to have these new space capabilities. They're basically going to have everything vertically integrated. And that's just that. That's where most money is going to these new companies like Elon Musk's SpaceX company now. Could have been any other company, by the way. Now, Elon Musk is only smarter because he's a better PR person, and that's that. I can almost guarantee that all these STEM science thing, these science shows, they are riding the coattails of that global effort to get more people in the US interested in science and technology, because in the past 40 years, due to this quote-unquote globalization shit, they outsourced everything to China, mostly, some other parts of the world, Indonesia, Taiwan, Vietnam. I'm talking about US politics now. What that did was they destroyed all that normal mailer lifestyle in the states between the seas, let us say. They destroyed everybody's life. They destroyed entire communities. Everybody suffered because of cheaper bottom lines and added shareholder value. Now they're waking up to it. Now they're going to bring everything back in. And if all you Zoomers survive the next 10 or 15 years without significant mental damage, you'll get better jobs eventually. Also, these boomer generations are going to pass on and people are going to inherit their stuff. So, things are kind of grimdark these days, and I'm recording in the 22nd of May, 2023. But when this generation turns over, and when the US kind of builds its base up again, it's going to be a better time in the US. I don't know about the rest of the world. The prospects for Europe kind of, I don't know, look grim. But maybe they can pull something off. I mean, it's going to be you have to look at the history of the world just before the 1970s. And I think it's going to be dialed back to that. So basically, if your country was not so great in, let's say, 1960s or whatever, it's still going to be not so great. If it was booming and roaring, it's going to be booming and roaring. And I'm looking at the US. It's really going to be booming and roaring down there, I hope. Because they've been blessed geographically. I mean, they got all their resources, all the food. Food is an important thing. Elsewhere in the world, you're going to have people dying of hunger again while being able to access TikTok. So it's going to be a weird, weird world in the near future. But it's not going to lead to the fucking collapse of the Western civilization. It's just going to be a rollback of this cheap and shitty money that was sloshing around from the 1990s onwards. And it's going to hurt a lot of people. I mean, my personal hints and tips to you would be to learn a trade, or at least have a house of your own somehow that you really own in the next 10-20 years. Then you have a castle, at least, you can make money on the sides, stuff like that. Oh man, we've drifted from all tomorrows to how to survive economic collapse. Alright, but don't be so glum. It's not, things aren't gonna come to an end. This is just the beginning, in fact. What else in all tomorrows? Galactic invasion or invasions by other species, they're almost certainly never gonna happen. This whole trope of biological entities boarding a ship and traveling to another place And stepping out of that ship to do shit is just so impossible, just for the reason that I've told. It's just one big trope, mostly based off immediate post-World War II fiction, where you had aliens landing and invading shit. You could have probes coming, stuff coming, but never real aliens, I think. And the reason I think I think intelligence is very common across the universe, but fossil fuels, the trifecta of fossil fuels, a kind of farming society with rigid monkey hierarchies, and a kind of tool-building intelligence like our own, they're very rare to have on top of each other. I mean, you could have things like people living on a planet, but maybe they don't have fossil reserves, so they don't have petroleum to make airplanes or tanks or space shuttles with. How are they going to travel then? Maybe they don't have heavy metals, so they can't really make an industrial revolution. And I'm sure there are lots of planets with just like knights and Saracens running each other through swords for millions of years on end. And I think those civilizations are going to be more durable in the long run, by the way. Like a constant 1453 level of civilization for 2 million years. Imagine that. So there. You might have some weird galactic phenomena, by the way. There are things which scientists observe in the universe, like gamma ray bursts. This is like an explosion of energy, so powerful it can sterilize apparently entire parts of galaxies, or like black holes and stuff like that. I mean, things like that are more likely to happen, and those might threaten our planet. Things like meteor impacts, and those might be inevitable, and maybe that will be the mass extinction that wipes humanity out at the end, because humans are pretty tenacious too. Civilization is fragile, and good riddance for that, but humans are pretty solid, robust, you know what I mean? Ooh, and before I forget, let's talk about post-human evolution, the evolution of people into other forms, different creatures. Okay, so prepare for another disappointment, but I also think that's kind of impossible at the levels in which we see in All Tomorrows. Heck, the whole reason I invented the Ku race, the Kuhanim race, was to make all these bizarre adaptations possible. Because there's no way in hell humans would evolve into something like snake people or even the killer folk. Because we have civilization, we have tools, we've got technology to do that for us. Instead of evolving clothes, we are more likely to build guns or spears or arrows. You know what I mean? So that's kind of impossible. And actually, because of that entire reason, I invented this fable of the Kuhanim, who come from nowhere to split and distort people into all variety of weird forms. Now, future evolution of people will go on, but it's going to be more subtle than you think. I mean, it's going to be much more slower and slightly less noticeable, and it's going to be less drastic for our species on the whole. I mean, you could get things like the overall complexion of people changing. Maybe in places like the United States and Europe, it's going to be a more mixed race kind of complexion rather than a pure white or pure black or pure Hispanic. You know what I mean? Or as intermarriages increase, you're going to see more people with different kind of skin tones. And I know this is a sensitive issue, so never forget that. If civilization kind of dials it back a little, you might actually see a return of tribalism or like the sort of communal cliqueiness, the kind which you saw during the reign of the Ottoman Empire and before the world wars in Europe, where you had many different ethnicities and religions living in the same place, but they rarely, I mean, they did intermarry and kind of like have kids from each other without anyone else noticing it on the sides, but they kind of remain distinct cultural things. Of course, it's a very hairy and kind of politically charged idea, so I would not want to touch that with a 40-foot pole. Just let it be known for the record that I fully support everyone mixing with everyone. I think it's a very healthy and cheerful and nice, liberating thing. Oh, just a minute, I'll be back. I got to do some laundry shit. Just bear with me for a second and we'll continue our conversation about posthumans. In the meantime, please consider supporting me on Patreon so I could afford the laundry detergent. Okay, future human evolution. As for the matter of people developing more distinct adaptations, like you have mountain people, for example, and they got bigger lungs, or you got these seaside people who have these ability to like kind of climb trees with slightly almost opposable toes. These are all things which we have in the world today, but that whole thing basically depends on a lack of mobility. And in this present day and age, people, especially large masses of people, are kind of more mobile than they have ever been at any point in the world's history. So, I mean, just if in the future you want a sort of new species of people, things will have to get pretty dark, grim, and racist really soon. And who knows, maybe, we talk about civilization rising and collapsing in waves like 8, 9, or 10 times. Maybe if that repeats enough and finally there's an extinction of people in the mainland or wherever, you could have some like new ethnicities forming in different parts of the world. And if things really turn really dark, maybe you could have some sort of lapse into a hunter-gatherer existence in certain parts of the world. But what those people will look like and what their culture will be like, nobody knows, and it's a hazard to guess. Now, you do also have significant differences in people's basically body physiques as a result of their lifestyles, increasing obesity. I mean, of course, if people have direct access to medical care, sanitation, and mobility, then they're gonna grow kind of taller and bolder. But this doesn't mean they're a better race. It means that people get more vitamins as kids and they're like more robustly built. This is an epigenetic change. It's not a change in the genes of people. And the more we study genetics, the more we realize that there are no distinct genes for taller people or sharper jawlines. You know what I mean? Genes regulate the growth of cell patterns in your body, and their effect is far more subtle and ingrained. And I'm really towing a fine line here not to go into any contemporary race discussions because I don't want to summon the racists out of the woodwork. So, humans will change in the future. Let's do a summary. Humans will change in the future. It will never be even as a thousands of 100% drastic as anything you see in all tomorrows. A lot of that change will be basically based on lifestyle differences and whether these changes are for the better or worse. They're not going to be genetic differences. They're going to be epigenetic changes. It's unlikely for a new species of humanity to form unless you really stretch your definition of what a species is in a really like awful and racist way. Nothing like that is going to happen. And if civilization collapses or there's a massive natural disaster, then you could have some more different varieties of people adapted for like certain different conditions. But once again, these will be more subtle things and they won't be as drastic or as comedic as the creatures you see in All Tomorrows. So, long story short, All Tomorrows, we'll never visit the stars. We'll like fuck around in the solar system, but just a little. We'll never get to colonize another planet. We might have some research bases, but that will be it. Humanity will produce 10 or 12 different civilizations before something like a meteor wipes us out. And then life will go on, endure. It's highly impossible for aliens to physically visit Earth. I don't consider it. We might receive a signal, but that would be that. And some previously unknown weird space phenomenon is more likely to be a prominent wow event rather than a visit by aliens. So there's that, my hints for All Tomorrows. Also for things like machine intelligence and gravitals, I mean, that was a complete fantasy. Sorry. It was a plot device because I wanted a mechanical berserker race in the book. And that was that, everyone. Sorry if this dashed your hopes. I'm a crusty, boring curmudgeon, maybe. Or maybe just a base realist guy. Just let me know in the comments. And thanks for your love and interest in All Tomorrows. And thanks for listening to this channel. If you just arrived at this video, please support me on Patreon. Even $1 a day, $1 a month makes a huge difference for me. Thank you, and stay tuned for the All Tomorrows rewrite. Don't worry, the rewrite will be more realistic but also more wild than you can ever imagine. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. Have a nice day and goodbye.